Good morning, everyone. I guess still technically morning in some time zones. But hello and welcome. I'm RJ Kerr, and this is my YouTube channel where we talk about storytelling and Dungeons and Dragons and TTRPGs and all of those wonderful, fantastic things. In this live stream, as you know, we're continuing our ongoing series, Let's Write an Adventure, where we write a D&D adventure real time, live here on the channel, step by step, so that you all can see my process and how I work through these. This is I think we're in week 9 of this at this point. And so you'll see my entire thought process as I work through writing an adventure, very slowly for you guys to see here. And so we are picking up, having spent the last 9 weeks working on an adventure that we brainstormed in episode 1, where the characters are hired by a community leader of some kind, uh, who represents the town that we now know as Skysong Gulch, to recover the only known deposit of our MacGuffin, cold iron, which is a Fey slaying, anti-Fey material, an ore that has been lost in a glacial mine that was once ravaged by disease. And I think last time I'm not sure, we named the glacial mine the Berg. That's right. Working title on that one. The community needs this cold iron to save themselves from the foretold coming of the Bloodgood Sisters Coven of Hags, and the characters are led to believe that the village plans to fight these powerful Fae. But once they recover the cold iron, but when they return with it, they discover the village actually intends to use the cold iron to pay off the hags. That's thus completing an ancient bargain. The party then has to decide whether to support empowering the coven with this Fey slaying material, and therefore making them a danger to any other Fey that they might wish to conquer, or to convince the community to fight back, knowing there's going to be consequences either way. And so, if you're new, we've worked through a fair amount of this already. So we started off with brainstorming, and now we've been eating our way through the adventure in chunks, jumping around as we have ideas and thoughts, and things come out organically, which is really my process creatively. You work on a part that's fun as you have ideas, and you build out till you don't have any more ideas, then you move on to the next thing. Um, and so last time we had spent some time working back in the Berg, um, where we had been getting a clear idea of this fortress glacial mine, out in the wastelands of this world that we're building. And we had segmented that up into 2 levels now, a distinct fortress level and then a mine level. And the idea being that there's a very distinct atmospheric shift from sort of abandoned fortress to dangerous horror kind of mine level. And the characters are going to have to explore all levels to find the 3 keys they need to access our the storage for this MacGuffin, the cold iron. So let's go ahead and take a look at where we were. So back here in the Berg, using our Notion template, downloadable again if you're new, downloadable in the description to this video. You can get that for free. And all of the templates that I use throughout this video series are all included in that one Notion template there. So help yourselves. Love to get your feedback on it if any of you are using it out there. And so we divided this up so we'd have this nice clear atmospheric shift. So, spooky abandoned fortress up top, but then like real horror down below, where the characters are will eventually come to find out that they're being hunted by a group of ghouls that were created out of the dead of this plague. Which we decided was Cackle Fever, straight out of the DMG. Why reinvent the wheel when you don't have to? So today, I wanted to work a little bit more on one section of where the characters can recover the key, specifically the forge. So there were 3 keys for cold iron storage that we littered around. There's one up at the garrison, the fortress level. There's one littered out the mine tunnels, forcing the players to confront the ghouls rather. And then the third one we had put inside the forge room, where the ghost of the old forge master is bound to that space, um, you know, forced to remain there until she can complete her unfinished business of her final masterpiece, a set of cold iron armor that the players can then collect after they succeed. And so the idea here is that the ghost is not inherently hostile, that she just wants to complete this armor, and she can do so with the character's help if they can, essentially give tangible form and use the tools in the room here. We came up with a couple options. One, some kind of skill challenge, potentially with tool proficiencies, where the players are guided, by the directions from the ghost, moving through this step by step. Alternatively, or perhaps additionally, this could involve being possessed by the ghost herself, which I really like. Just the idea of, oh, I don't know how to use some of these tools. Oh, well, let me help you out, stepping inside of your body. Ah, okay, cool. Um, I just think that's a fun kind of storytelling moment. It seems like a kind of a quintessential kind of D&D thing, or fantasy kind of thing here, where you get very hands-on help from the ghost herself. And so today I wanted to spend some time digging into that skill challenge in here and how we might build that out. The skill challenges themselves are not terribly difficult to build. Um, the real trick to running them is the narration, because the skill challenge in its basic format, if you're not familiar with, is your the characters have to succeed a certain number of skill checks, usually using a variety of skills, sometimes determined by the character, sometimes determined by the players, sometimes determined by the DM. But they have to achieve a certain number of them before failing three of them, and that's how they succeed. Um, the number that they need to complete varies from instance to instance, and we're going to kind of go through my thought process for running that here, building that here. The real difficulty to running a skill challenge is not in setting it up, because it's going to be dice roll, dice roll, dice roll. It's narrating the process to your players in real time. What's happening. So, to that end, since we are going to be having the characters craft a suit of armor in one way or another, um, it might behoove us as a DM to know a little bit about how that armor is made. And now, there's two schools of thought to this, and whichever you choose is really up to you. There are pros and cons to both, but there's no right answer. Okay, and that's, you can get really into the details and really research how armor is made and all the various steps that go into that, and really familiarize yourself with that. Google and Wikipedia are great sources for that kind of information. Or you can broad stroke it. You can know the the generalized steps, a little bit of information about what goes into each, and use that to guide your process. My thoughts on it are this: if that if you're researching something that is going to be integral to your campaign, if information on how to forge armor, for example, is going to come up again and again and again in your campaign, and the players are really going to need to know this information for whatever reason, um, then yeah, do the research, get into details, make sure you know it so that you can give them accurate information so they can apply that information later, right? Because nothing is more frustrating than you as a DM laying out, okay, well, this is the process of let's say, making armor. This is the process X, Y, and Z. And then the players go, okay, they learn that. And then you come back later on and you're asking them to do a very similar task, and they try to lay out that process, and you go, ooh, no, that's not quite right. it's such a frustrating experience for a player that we don't want to do that. So if it's a very important part of your campaign, then yes, dig in, do the research, know what you're talking about to the best of your ability. Um, if it's something like what we have here, where it's going to be a particular instance of it, and we're not expecting it to come back up, and it's certainly not going to be a pivotal part of the campaign overall, or even the adventure overall. It's just a moment. We can broad stroke it, and in that case, again, Google, Wikipedia can be your friends. You can kind of just skim through that, or you can do what I did in this case. And before the session, I typed into ChatGPT, what steps does blacksmith use to make a breastplate? And obligingly, ChatGPT spit out 7 steps for us. Specifically, uh, design and planning, material selection, cutting and shaping, forming and hammering, joining pieces together, and adding details and reinforcements, finishing touches, and then fitting and adjusting. So I guess 8 steps, not 7 steps. My bad. So it gave us its bullet points. It gave me a brief description of each, and that's really all we need for this, since it's a moment. One thing that I find that new DMs, specifically new DMs who are trying to build their own worlds, do a lot of is they spend a lot of time on details. Details are important, don't get me wrong. Details are very helpful, but they go down rabbit holes and dump a lot of energy into things that are going to be just a few moments in the game, when you could be spending your energy building out the campaign or the adventure itself. So don't make life harder on yourself than it needs to be. So in this case, we're not going to. In this case, we're going to keep it easy. We have 8 steps here. I think we can arguably cut out 3 of them for this skill challenge. For example, designing and planning. Our Ghost Forge Master would have presumably done that before this. Material selection, well, she's already done that. She knows it's made of cold iron. So those are already completed. The players don't have to engage with those. And then the last step, fitting and adjustments, are adjusting the breastplate to whoever the specific wearer is going to be. Effectively, it's tailoring the armor. And this is what would be done in real life because it needs to fit a particular person as best as possible. In game, though, one, it's not necessarily a breastplate. We're giving the players a choice of type in this case. But two, in D&D, that kind of tends to be hand-waved in a lot of games. Not in all games, but in many of them, because if you don't, well, then anytime you got any armor, you'd have to have it. You'd have to go take it somewhere to get adjusted and fitted to you, or before your character can wear it, which is something you absolutely can do. There's rule variants for that in the. I want to say they're in the DMG. They might be in the Player's Handbook. I think they're in the Dungeon Master's Guide. But that's certainly something you can do if you want a very realistic game, and that's a-okay. But in any case, it would be something that would happen after the fact, not something that would happen during the skill challenge. So that means that during the skill challenge, we have 5 key steps, which I think is really nice because it means it gives us 5 skill challenges, 5 skills to succeed at before failing at 3. It makes a nice clean ratio for our skill challenge. I personally like to keep skill challenges between 4 and 6 for the number of dice rolls they need before they fail 3, because the more you do, the more likely they are to hit 3 fails before they complete it. So that is my long-winded way of saying we're going to use that for our 5 skills. So let's go ahead and get that in here. We're going to have a skill challenge, and you know what? We've just kind of been brainstorming on ideas there. Let's clean this up just a touch, and we'll go. Ooh, what heading is this? This is heading 2. Okay, so this will be heading 3. Heading 3. Make it easy on ourselves. So let's say forging the armor. Cool. Run as a skill challenge characters must complete successfully pass each skill check before failing 3 times. Cumulatively. Hey, I spelled that correctly. Look at me. Gold star. All right. Cool. So, let's also say they may choose to do this themselves or with the Forge. Let's say, or with Forge Master TK name. Our ghost needs a name at some point. They're going to speak to her. They should know what to call her. Or with Forge assistance. Via possession. So, since that's a possibility, how I think that would kind of work in this would be if they're possessed by the ghost, you still have the players make the rolls, but they would be using the ghost's proficiency bonus in this case. So let's go ahead and make it simple on ourselves, and let's look up what a ghost's actually. Did I? No, I haven't. See, this is why I should just hyperlink all the monsters. Makes it easier. So we'll go back and forth. So let's do ghost here. Let's find out what the ghost proficiency bonus is. It is a +2. Okay, cool. Easy enough. Where were we? Here we are. So you can just link the stat block if you really want. Sometimes that's what I'll do. Frequently, though, if there's a number I know that I'm gonna need, I'll just make it easy on myself, and we'll just make up parentheses. Add +2 to rolls for, or we'll say use ghosts efficiency bonus. Let's say +2. Cool. All right, so that makes it simple. We know that if they go, I don't know how to use these tools, I'm not proficient, they can be possessed, and then they can get the +2 proficiency bonus. Excellent. All right, so that means that we need to now outline our steps. So we're going to have step 1 is cutting and shaping. And so what I like to do when I write these out is, again, these are just kind of notes for me, right? And they're notes for you when you're running the game. And so I'll kind of give it the heading, what's the name of the step. I'll do a quick description of what happens there so that when I'm narrating this to my players, I have something to kind of work from to jog my memory. So, so effectively what ChatGPT tells me, and if you are actually a blacksmith and I am wrong, please feel free to correct me. I don't know that it'll change anything in here unless it's dramatically incorrect. But let me know. I like to learn things. So let's say that their ChatGPT says that using a template or the design as a guide, the blacksmith cuts metal into the rough shape of the breastplate. This can be done using various tools such as, well, it says cutting torch, shears, or a bandsaw. Obviously, cutting torch, not what we're going to use here. But so using a metal, let's say, form, characters shape the cold iron into the rough, shape of the armor type selected. And you might ask yourself, well, how do I know what armor type that's going to be? well, then you simply ask your players before this. So that brings up a good point. And this is kind of more of a running the game element as opposed to a writing the game element. But it's worth mentioning here that when we have something like, hey, there's going to be cold iron armor, but we don't want to decide what kind it's going to be because we want somebody in the party to get to use it, and we don't know what armor they're going to want. Um, we're giving the players a choice. When they come into this room and you're kind of narrating what's happening, you lay all the situation out for them that the ghost is haunting this place and they need help. They can't lift the tools of the forge anymore. They need a physical body. And the players go, oh, what kind of armor are we making? You go, I don't know. What kind of armor are we making? Throw it out to them. Let them choose then and there. Don't make them labor over it, but, go with whatever they toss out. Excuse me. So you can throw that element out to them, and you can do that with a lot of stuff in your game. In fact, there's a whole school of thought of, when they walk into a place, asking the players what their characters notice first and foremost, kind of helps them create some of the world as well. And when your players help build some of the world, it does get them more invested in the campaign setting, in the adventure itself. So toss it out before you start running the skill challenge. Get them to answer that, and then run with it, as it were. So we've got that. So now we need to set a DC for this, and there's one sort of general guideline that I go to when I'm setting DCs in the game, because there's a finite number of them, and it's not a terribly nuanced thing. So I go to the Dungeon Master's Guide, and I actually walk my happy butt over to the traps section here, because it has two tables that I use all the time, even outside of traps. And so scrolling past the ship section for whatever reason. And we're coming down to trap save, DCs, and attack bonuses, and the damage severity by level. We don't need the damage severity here for this because there's no threat of damage to the characters during the skill challenge here, or during this skill challenge specifically. But we can go with the save DC, because this is going to give us a good range of effectively easy, medium, hard, right? So there's a couple schools of thought when it comes to skill challenge in terms of the DC. Some folks will say keep the DC consistent. Some folks will say have it escalate. Some folks will say keep it kind of mid-range. Others will say, well, it should be harder. Or some will say, well, they're doing a lot of rolls, it should be easier. Go with whatever your gut tells you in this. Personally, these are third level characters we're working with. So we can make it a little more difficult on them. I personally like the idea of skill challenges getting kind of progressively harder as they go on. And so for this, I like the idea of sticking with our mid-range here and saying that our first checks will be 12, and then later on the checks will bump up to 15. You theoretically, if you wanted to, could literally ramp up. So the first check is a 12, the second is a 13, then you're 14, then a 15, then a 16. There's nothing wrong with that. For simplicity's sake, for myself, I'll say, the first three will be a 12, the last two will be a 15, unless there's a good reason not to in this case. If I'm dealing with higher level characters, I will bump that up, because higher level characters are going to have higher proficiency bonuses. They're going to have, just higher bonuses in general for a lot of their stuff. They will have, adjusted ability scores and all that kind of stuff. So I may bump that up. But for third level characters, we can go straight off that chart. Nice and simple. So let's say we're going to set our DC at 12. Now, you might write for yourself a note about what kind of skill check you might recommend for this. But one of the cool things about skill challenges, what makes them a lot of fun for players, is there's a little bit of, I don't want to say lawyering in this, because it's not really finding line items in the rules, but there's a little bit of making a case, right? Where you might have a skill check in mind. You might have a specific skill in mind, but the player should be allowed to make a case for why their character might use a different skill, um, and how they would achieve this objective with that skill. So, you know, tool proficiencies in general are also interesting in this capacity because there's no ability score associated with them specifically. Unlike a lot of other skills, like a stealth check is typically associated with dexterity, intimidation is typically associated with charisma, um, you know, persuasion typically associated with charisma, that kind of thing. But a player could make an argument that while their character's not terribly charismatic, they present a really logical argument, and so they're going to use intelligence instead of charisma for that persuasion skill check. Or the classic one of, they're really beefy and intimidating, so you use strength for the intimidation check. With tool proficiencies, we don't have that rough guidance. And so I think this is kind of fun to kind of toss out to the players and go, okay, well, it's going to be a check with Smith's tools. How is your character going to go about cutting and shaping here? And they go, oh, I'm going to hammer it into place. Oh, I'm going to force it along the mold. Okay, well, then maybe that's a strength check. Ooh, well, I think I'm gonna warm up the metal a little bit, and then I'm gonna ease it onto there. That might be an intelligence or a wisdom check. You can use your gut here. If you're not entirely sure what to do, make yourself a note. But in this case, I'm just gonna say DC check with Smith's tools. And I'll know that I'll just toss it out to my players on what they're gonna do at that point. Cool. So with those steps, we're just going to kind of follow along for the next 5 here. I'm going to say the next one is forming and hammering. That one is likely going to be a strength check. But effectively, the rough cut metal is then heated in the forge until it becomes malleable. The rough cut metal is heated in the forge until malleable. Nope, spelling that wrong. Malleable, and then hammered. Hammered into the desired shape. So effectively, they rough formed it, and now they're fine-tuning it here. And again, we're going to say that that's going to be a DC 12. You know what? I'm going to save myself the time, and I'm going to copy and paste that bad boy. Copy, paste. Excellent. Great. So then we've got joining pieces together. So let's see here. Let's see. If the breastplate is designed to be multi-part, blacksmiths may need to weld or rivet the separate pieces together. Okay. The segments of the armor are fitted together and joined. Great. DC 12 again. I copied and pasted. I can just do that now. Okay, cool. And if it makes sense for you, if you're going, well, joining the pieces together isn't as, that's a little more delicate than the forming and hammering, cutting and shaping. Well, okay, maybe you can increase the DC to the 15 here, or what have you. Entirely up to you. We're gonna leave it at 12 for the moment, and we'll see how we feel later. All right. Then we have adding. Oh, this annoys me. Why did I do that? Changing capitalization throughout. Unforgivable. Details and reinforcements. Great. Okay, so let's see. Depending on the design, the blacksmith may add decorative elements or reinforcing ridges to the breastplate. This could involve further shaping, hammering, or welding. Okay, so let's say decorative, decorative. There's an O in there. Decorative elements, and structural reinforcement are added. Great. We'll say that is, I don't know why I bolded that. We'll say that that is a little more delicate work. So let's bump that up to a 15. And in a place like this, since there's, it's easy enough to go, oh, well, cutting and shaping, that's strength. Forming, hammering, that's strength. Joining the pieces together, that's strength. Adding detail and reinforcements, that's strength. Maybe dexterity. I would try to look for reasons why other abilities might be useful here. So I might say, hey, cutting and shaping is strength because it's a raw thing. Forming and hammering, well, maybe that's dexterity because it takes a little more finessing. Joining the pieces together, well, that might be wisdom because we need to see how they fit and how they're going to interact and kind of imagine how they're all going to work together. Adding details and reinforcements, maybe that's intelligence. Because that's you really gotta think about where it's going to get hit and what parts are likely to collapse and yada yada yada. So I mean, you don't have to do that element. I like to kind of come up with reasons why other ability scores might be useful here because it helps draw in the group. What you don't want in a skill challenge is for one character to be the only one that rolls, and everybody else is kind of sitting around waiting for them to get through, potentially up to 7 or 8 die checks, right? It creates a dead space to the rest of the group. So it's better to have everybody involved and one person working on one element, somebody else working on another, even if it means the ghost is kind of body hopping in this case, right? Which again, narratively is kind of cool, or could be kind of cool. So, and then last is finishing touches. Okay, armor elements are finalized. Buckles, straps, and padding are added. Great, cool. And then we are adding this here. Again, let's make that a higher DC. And this is one that in particular I'd say, okay, wisdom or intelligence maybe, as you think through all the final edges and elements of this. We might wiggle some other things around. Like, so for example, instead of strength being used in cutting and shaping, maybe it's constitution because there's a fair amount of just, stamina required to cold beat this metal into shape. And then we're using strength for forming and hammering. Then we're using dexterity for joining the pieces together. Then we've got, adding the details and reinforcements is wisdom, or intelligence there. And then finishing touches is wisdom or intelligence. All things that could be done here. But in any case, we now have our skill challenge put together in a few bullet points and some easy steps. And now we've got enough here to play with it. We can go back and kind of delete some of this stuff if we want to. I'm going to leave it in place for the moment here because it kind of gives us a feel for the vibe of the room. And when we go back at the very end of writing our adventure to kind of clean things up, we may decide to consolidate some of this down into a couple key lines, which is not necessarily a bad idea. But yeah, so we have a playable skill check to that point, skill challenge rather to that point. So fantastic. That didn't take very long at all, or at least it won't take you very long at all when you're not talking it out in real time. Fabulous. All right, so we kind of have our ghost moment here. One thing we need to do, I think, before we move on is we need to give our Forge Master a name. So let's go up to handy dandy fantasy name generators, and We know this place was controlled by elves originally, so let's say elf names. You can use any name you like. We're going to use female here since I've been calling her her throughout this. Let's see. Ooh, Kenya. That's interesting. I kind of like that. Zara. Ooh, I like that. Zara. Okay, so let's see here. Forge Master Zara. Cool. To this end, we also need to figure out how we talked a little bit about before about how the characters might accomplish getting this key if they were to fail the skill challenge. We talked about the possibility of them being able to steal the key is needed because a ghost is a little beefier of an opponent than they are probably used to. Well, definitely used to, but a little beefier than a group of third level characters might be able to take on, especially since it has damage resistance to like freaking everything that's non-magical. And there's no guarantee that our third level characters are going to be outfitted with magical weapons and what have you to be able to take on this ghost. So we want to have an option that allows them to complete this challenge without having to fight the ghost, or at least gives them another way of getting this key without having to fight the ghost. Especially since, actually raises an interesting question. How does she react if they fail the challenge? Probably not well. She probably freaks out a little bit. That might make her aggressive, trying to drive them out. But she also might not be willing to relinquish possession of a character if she's inside, simply so that she could try to do this again. Which, yeah, again, makes an interesting challenge. Yeah. Spell good and evil. That's a 5th level spell. It could be tough to get that ghost out of there. Might have to mess up your buddy. But it's a good element here. It's a little, could be a real dilemma for the, that could be a real dilemma for the players, but I think it could make a really interesting situation. So let's make a note to ourselves. So let's say, let's make some success. Let's explicitly outline some success states and failure states, right? Which is typically good practice anyway. What must the players do to succeed? What must the characters do to succeed? And then what happens should they fail? So let's say here, if the characters successfully complete the skill challenge, Forge Master Zara allows them to take her cold iron storage key, as she is now, she no longer has need of more cold iron. At peace, she gently fades into her afterlife. Yeah. Cue angelic choir. If the characters fail, the armor is destroyed, and Zara must start all over again. This enrages her, and she demands the characters leave at once. If she possesses any one of the characters, she refuses to relinquish their body until driven out. Dropping her host to. So here we have an opportunity. We coming up with a mechanic to get the ghost out of the body. If we go by their stat block, we can do that. And maybe we should do that, is to go by the stat block and be a little savage about this and say that, she doesn't leave the body doesn't leave her host body until they're dropped to 0 hit points. Forcing the other party members to attack their ally and drop them. Or we could be a little bit kinder if that seems a little harsh. And we could say that drop, got to do enough damage to get them down to quarter health or something like that. I kind of... The maniacal evil side of me. If I was doing this for, like, my players in my, like, main campaigns, I would probably make them drop them to 0 because they have a fair amount of healing capability. They got ways to come back from that. But just writing in general, I'm leaning towards dropping to a quarter health, because then that's something it's somewhat recoverable with a short rest. It also means that it's recoverable with a short rest, but it also depletes some of their resources, which is really kind of the idea of little setback items like this. You're not looking to necessarily kill players for the most part. You're really looking more for a way to deplete some of their resources to make further challenges difficult, right? Because sleeping here in the fortress is not a safe prospect, right? So taking a long rest here is something that they really can only do in desperation. And even then, it might not work at all. But having to burn up some of those hit dice is a big, is a big setback. It limits their ability to absorb damage going forward, or to recover from damage going forward. So let's do that. Dropping your host to quarter to a quarter of their hit point maximum. What does it say? Point maximum is sufficient to drive her out. She will not willingly allow the characters to re-enter Forge. However, she cannot leave the Forge room either. Cool. So let's make another section here about getting the key. Getting the key. If, let's say stealing the key. Let's call it stealing the key. Stealing the key. If the characters fail the skill challenge, they must They must steal the key. This leaves two options. This leaves two options. One, they can snatch the key as they flee, causing Zara to attack. 2, they can attempt to sneak back in later while Zara is distracted. Let's scroll down so you can see that. Well, Zara is distracted and steal the key then. Yeah, so we can then sit here and kind of outline how that would work if we need to, but this is a pretty simple exchange, right? So number one is going to be combat. They snatch the key, they've got to fight off Zara until they're all out of the room, and then they can be safe. Which kind of dictates that we need the forge room to be a larger room, perhaps with some obstacles that might slow the players down or slow the characters down, but which Zara herself, as a ghost, could pass through. So that'll inform us when we make this map. And then number two, sneaking back in. I mean, this is a series of stealth checks and sleight of hand checks for the most part, right? Contested against Zara's passive perception, which we know is going to be 11 here from her stat block. So it's easy enough to say, hey, you're going to need to make a stealth check to get into the room. You're going to make a sleight of hand check to get out of the box without that making any noise, and then another stealth check to get out of the room. So simple, easy 3 checks, and you really don't need to note that down unless it's helpful to you. Unless there's a lot going on in your session and you find that having that kind of stuff bulleted out is useful to you. Let's see here. In this case, what I might just say is contested against her passive perception. And that's, man, I really cannot. What is it? Passive perception. Really can't spell today, can I? All right. Yeah, and that's really all I would write to myself. It's just a kind of quick note about that. If I'm writing for other people, I might spell it out a little bit more because I don't want to assume that they're in the same frame of mind that I am when we do this. So I think that's good enough there. Cool. All right. Yeah. So that means that we've got enough to run the skill challenge rather. I'm gonna keep saying it the wrong way. Run the skill challenge. We've got some information on how to steal the key. There's gonna be some role playing with the Forge Master here then, because they're gonna have to have a conversation with her, which means we want to give her some details. So let's create an NPC stat block for her. So let's say Forge Master Zara. Cool. And we're gonna say she could be an ally, she could be an enemy. Let's say we can call her indifferent. No. I don't like doing indifference. Indifference, the problem with the difference in D&D games is not that characters won't be indifferent to the characters, right? They won't have NPCs that are indifferent to the characters. It's that indifference suggests that there's no desire there, there's no want. And that's a very dangerous place to be in, storytelling wise, because if the people or the creatures that the characters interact with never don't want anything from them, then there is no reason for them to interact, right? Um, they may not know they want something from the characters. They may not have wanted something from the characters at the beginning, but they've got to have some kind of objective, which is not to say that they're there with intent and purpose. Although you should put things in the adventure with intent and purpose, for the most part, with only a few things being kind of truly random. But even in random encounters, the NPCs involved want something. They have an objective. Kurt Vonnegut is famously recommended, specifically to authors, obviously not to DMs, but to authors, that you should give your characters something that they desperately want, even if it's just a glass of water. So these wants, these objectives, they don't have to be huge, but there should be some goal in any interaction that the NPCs want to achieve. Even if that's just to get the players to go away or the characters to go away and leave them alone, right? Or if it's just to survive the interaction. So it's a frame of mind thing for me, and it may be very different from you, and that's a-okay. But for me, I don't like to mark anybody down as indifferent because it suggests apathy, and apathy makes for a bland encounter, one that could have just been left behind. So in this case, we're going to mark her as ally and enemy. To that end, one thing before I kind of get off my tirade about NPCs and objectives, it's really worth noting, because as we build out NPCs, we're going to see this more and more. We've talked a little bit about giving them objectives, giving them motivations and misbeliefs and that kind of stuff, which really are what you need. But if you're ever struggling to come up with an objective for an NPC, or even a motivation to that end, but primarily an objective, there are really only two kinds of objectives. Really, there are objectives that are about getting something, and then objectives that are about avoiding something. So any objective that you can phrase as to get X, Y, or Z is an active objective. Anything that is about to avoid is a reactive objective, right? So, for example, in a goblin ambush scenario, the goblins, want to get a win over the characters. They want to get a victory. The characters want to avoid being killed, right? And so I know it sounds a little forced to be like to get a victory as opposed to they want to kill the party, or they want to unalive the party. Please don't demonetize me. Not that I'm monetized. Anyway, hear too many people say that. Anyway, cycling forward. But there's something that they specifically want to achieve or that they want to avoid, right? And so look at it that way. When you're working with your NPCs, when you're trying to figure out what their objectives are, ask yourselves, what is it they hope to get? And if there's nothing they hope to get, what is it they hope to avoid? Like, what are they trying not to do? Are they trying to avoid revealing a secret? Are they trying to avoid being detected? Are they trying to avoid a boring conversation? Whatever it is. If you work with those two elements, it's a lot easier to come up with objectives and what they want. Anyway, that's my rant. That's my rant on NPC. So to that end, let's go ahead and start getting Forge Master Zara kind of built out a little bit here. We don't have a ton of time left. Let's go to our NPC template. And here we will save her as the ghost stat block. Control copy the URL and then stat block. Ghost. All right. I don't know why I can't say that with a serious. But I can't. It's too much fun to use a voice. Okay. Occupation. Former Forge Master of the Berg. Cool. And we can come up with what she looks like. Let's see. She's a ghost. So, I mean, she was an elf. So we're going to say female elf ghost. We can give her an alignment if we really want. I don't often worry about alignments. I think they can be tough to pin down exactly what that says about an individual. I think it's better to go with objectives and motivations. Her objective for this is pretty clear. At least to me it is. She must finish her final masterpiece. Final masterpiece is redundant. Her masterpiece, a suit of cold iron armor. Cool. And her motivation. Now, her motivation could be something along the lines of, let's see here, her craft. Let's see, her creating. Creating masterworks from raw materials gives me purpose, proves to those who came after that I existed. Yeah, so it's a sense of immortality for her. And let's change this first one to first person, because again, you don't have to write these in first person, but it helps me get into the mindset. And then misbelief is my value as a well, she's not a human. So my value as a person is only as strong as the quality of my work. Yeah, so her whole being wrapped up in the forge, which explains why she is even dead, bound to this place, that she can't rest until she finally finishes that one piece. We don't need to put a lot of effort into her, other than to just kind of have a sense of what she is, and how she views the world. So the characters interact with her. You've got something to work with. But let's go ahead and let's give her a couple distinguishing features. What should she have? Forge Master. So let's say I have a strong-armed, burly build. And a exquisite, let's say exquisite tattoo of crossed of a crossed forge hammer and tongs on my chest. Cool. Gives her a cool little vibe there. Cool little details, and especially for an NPC like this, it's really all we need. We give a gist or build, or distinguishing physical characteristics. She's impressively impressively built, specifically her arms, and then she has that tattoo, um, which is two kind of physical things which we don't always need. Um, we could say that she has a hmm, it's kind of a cliche to say blacksmiths are gruff, no nonsense kind of people. So let's do something a little different here. Let's say that I have a um, let's see, I speak in fanciful terms, especially about my art and craft. Yeah, so let's make her a little more whimsical in that regard, especially that kind of personality belies um, the uh, sort of the more classic elements of her physique, which is kind of cool to do those juxtapositions sometimes. I think it makes more exciting characters, especially when you set up an expectation of, oh, yes, she's a strong armed, burly blacksmith, and your players go, okay, yeah, yeah, they all are. That's cool. And then she's just kind of a whimsical, fanciful kind of person, personality wise. It will make her seem a little more memorable to them. At least it should. Cool. All right. So that kind of wraps up what we have going on for today. So let's go ahead and close out there. Again, thank you so much for joining me on part 9 of Let's Write an Adventure. If you have liked this video or this series or anything on my channel, please like the video. Please subscribe if you're not already so you can see more of this. And frankly, your likes and subscriptions encourage me to keep doing this. I appreciate the positive reinforcement. Uh, Likewise, we're going to continue this on next week with part 10. And so that will be next Saturday, which will be May 4th. So, again, thank you so much for joining me. If you have any comments, questions, suggestions, please leave them in the chat. If you'd like to use this template for adventures yourself, there's a link in the chat as well. And then if you're curious to see what kind of work this turns out, I do have a free adventure on the DM's Guild called Plague Breakers that you're welcome to download and check out. I use this exact system that we're describing here to write that and come up with well, that complete adventure. Anyway, thank you so much for joining me today, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.